Israel continues its campaign in Gaza and ground troops are ready to go in. Israel doesn't want this, but I rather think many Palestinians do. We discuss.
We did not want to go to this, for this event to reach this situation, but because of the naked aggression, and they imposed this battle on us, and they will suffer the consequences of their action.
We do everything we can to keep Palestinian civilians out of harm's way. That's the difference between us and the terrorists. They deliberately target our civilians. They fire at our civilians. They also hide behind civilians, as you say, using them as human shields. They actually place missile batteries next to schools, next to hospitals, next to mosques. That's the enemy we're dealing with in Hamas.
Contrast the two spokesmen there. Crazy man, face covered, calling for blood, guts, pain, and anyway. Israel, Hamas, Gaza, the world's opinion. Jonathan Harlevy is an intelligence expert. Paige McPherson is a Sun News Straight Talk contributor. Hello, both of you.
Hello.
Let's begin with you, sir. I try to be balanced on this issue. I really do. I know there are people who say, oh, you're one-sided. Not at all. But I can't think of any reason why Israel would want to destabilize its economy, bring in the number of troops, send people to shelters. They don't want this. They want to live in peace. But if their people are kidnapped, if there are hundreds of rockets fired on their people, something has to be done.
100%. There's no other way. So the dilemma of the Israeli government is how to stop the firing of rockets and missiles into Israel. This is a great dilemma because Israel does not want to get into ground war, in Gaza, and does not want to harm any civilians. So, but when the other side uses the civil facilities in Gaza and using the citizens in Gaza as a human shield, you have a problem. If you don't do anything, you give license to the other side to kill your population. So this is the dilemma. It's not just the dilemma of Israel, the dilemma of any democratic country.
You know far better than I do that they've done this before. It'll prevent the rockets from being fired for a while, but they do find a way to get them again to rearm. Now, obviously, Egypt is a vital part of this equation, and I think you have a government in Egypt now, thank the Lord, that will stop some of the arms coming in, but it will start again. There may be a hiatus of a year or 2 years, but this is not going to end Hamas's campaign to destroy the Jews of the region.
Yes, if the Western world would stand by Israel and support Israel and back Israel in its war on terror, that will be ended. This is the problem. The world must support Israel. Israel is the last barrier in the line of defense of the Western world.
I want to speak to you about this because I think it's very interesting how people who are anti-Israel perceive all of this. There seems to be an assumption that Israeli Jews are inherently evil, sadistic. They want to hurt people. Anyone who knows Israel knows most people, they're actually largely indifferent. They'd rather party. They want nothing to do with God. They don't love the Palestinians. They just want them to, you do your thing, we do our thing. They're happy, they'd love Gaza to be prosperous, wealthy, and so on. They can't make that happen. At the same time, they have to defend themselves. But how do you convey that to people in Canada who seem to be obsessed with disliking and hating everything that Israel does?
Well, certainly there is an unevenness when it comes to the media coverage that we're seeing, and even on social media. You know, since this has been going on, I have been all over social media looking at what's going on, and you're right, there is this misperception that there's evil, hateful motives behind, I think, what people in Israel are doing. We know that this began with the kidnapping of 3 Israeli teenagers. It did not begin with anything else. That's what started this. It wasn't a hateful motive on behalf of Israel. And yet we do see an unevenness in the media coverage, absolutely. And you know what? The people who are so outraged about, Israel apparently being an apartheid state, of course, an absolutely false claim, but so outraged, these international communities, about the boycott, divestment, sanctions campaign. We need to do this. Where's the international outrage over the, barrage of rocket fire that's falling over Israel and had been for days before they decided to retaliate? Where is that kind of international outrage? We're just not seeing
Where's the outrage over Lebanon saying that more than 115 different occupations no Palestinian can be part of? Where's the outrage over Morocco building a wall and saying this number of people cannot enter our country? Where's the outrage over Sudan saying we're going to kill most of our black Christian citizens? We know that there's a moral schizophrenia around all of this. I want to show a clip which I think conveys a sort of juxtaposition and the reality of existence. This is a wedding. It's Jewish weddings. I mean, I'm sure the catering is wonderful. But these are people who are they're getting married. They don't want to hurt anyone. This is what happens. Have a look.
מוגן חבר'ה, יש לנו מעל הראש, לכולם, להיכנס לאולם, כולם.
So they go to the shelters. Now, that's been a common existence for people in Sderot and elsewhere, actually, close to Gaza. But now they're trying to hit Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. I mean, a lot of these rockets, most of them are being intercepted. But the attempt is there.
The attempt is there. By the way, my relative, a young girl, was injured 3 years ago from a rocket launched from Gaza and targeted a mall in the city of Ashkelon.
Yeah.
She was badly injured. So this
Ashkelon is a fairly large city. I mean, this is not some small town or a settlement. This is well within Israel proper. It always has been. And it's incredible they could reach that far.
They can reach that far. Also Haifa and Dimona. So they target the very sensitive facilities in Israel. Once the chemical facilities in Haifa and the nuclear facility in Dimona.
So we're allowed to say that now, are we? That Dimona is...
Yeah, the Dimona also is also one of the targets. So that can cause a damage and kill thousands and thousands of Israelis. So this is the, it's also absurd because Hamas targeted, by the way, the power station in Ashkelon that supplies Gaza with electricity.
That's ridiculous. So the Israelis are supplying power to Gaza, and Hamas in Gaza tries to destroy their power stations so that people of Gaza will have no power, hospitals won't function. It's suicidal. I mean, it really is a cult of blood and suffering.
Right, and I mean, it goes so much further than that. I mean, you brought up the human shield. That's exactly what's happening. We see Hamas encouraging people to go where the IDF has fired a flare to warn people in the building that they're going to be targeting that building because it was a Hamas operative site. Then, instead, we see people in Gaza rushing to be this human shield to either stop the bombing from the IDF, which they know is not going to happen, or basically be martyrs for this, and they're encouraged by their own government to do this.
Let me ask both of you about this. Let me ask you about this. There are many watching, and I fully understand, who will say, come on. These are like anyone. They don't want their children to die. There may be a few hardcore lunatics who want to die for the cause. Do ordinary people in Gaza really rush to be human shields?
We have an experiment. We've seen that in 2009. We've seen that in other clashes between Israel and the Palestinians. So you see the pattern is repeated itself. So you have to come into conclusion that it's gained the support of the Palestinian people. But I want to give you another example. I've seen that yesterday and today. Videos from Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, people cheering.
We showed that yesterday.
Yes, it's amazing. And this morning from Abu Dis, it's very close to Jerusalem. You know, they are going to be attacked by these rockets, and they are cheering because the chance that Jews would be killed by the same rocket.
You know, the BBC, which is not a close friend of Israel, but the BBC it tries to do a fairly good job. They have now said a lot of the pictures coming out of Gaza, they're lies, they're propaganda. They've tracked them and traced them to Syria. It's not the Syrians, it's pictures from Syria where radical Islamists have murdered other Muslims in Syria. They're pretending these are from Gaza. If anyone thinks this is part of the great Zionist conspiracy, they can call me a liar if they want. I was there in the Hezbollah war in Israel. I was covering that. And we would walk past certain places where bombs or rockets had landed. And it was strange. There was always a teddy bear. There was always a teddy bear or a doll on top of the rubble. And even some people from The Guardian and other left-wing papers eventually would say, this is weird. I mean, what a coincidence. And they realized what was going on. And the dolls and the teddy bears, there was never any dust on them. They were always completely fine. They were impeccable. They were being placed there every single time by, in that case, Hezbollah propaganda people. I'm sorry, they do this is done a great deal in the Arab world. Everyone plays with propaganda, but I have to say, in my experience, and it's not that limited, the Arab world does this over and over again because they know that Western reporters tend to be credulous and gullible, and they want to be on their side.
Absolutely. I mean, we saw this, Hamas doing this in 2012 in terms of the pictures that are circulating on social media. Some of the pictures that we've seen that, people tweet are happening in Gaza right now are actually from Syria or Iraq or Gaza years ago. And it has become this sort of war of propaganda. That's how they view it. And that's an unfortunate thing. We know that that kind of propaganda in Gaza really starts at the very base level with children in schools learning to despise the enemy. So they're doing it to their own people, and then they feed the same thing to the Western world as we are consuming it in the media. And good on BBC for doing that piece that exposed that, because that's a really important point to make. And even, when we're talking about the casualty numbers, this is a point that's often brought up by media. Well, we see the number of deaths in Gaza that have happened so far during this conflict. In particular, there haven't been any deaths in Israel. I mentioned there have been injuries on both sides, but that's a point that's often brought up. Well, perhaps that's because, the IDF is protecting their own civilian lives, whereas we see Hamas encouraging people to go in front of the bombs and be these human shields, firing out of hospitals and schools and places like that. Perhaps that accounts for some of the death toll too.
And also it seems to me quite I don't know, grotesque in a way that what some reporters are saying is if only the Palestinians were better at aiming their rockets than the Israelis. Anyway, appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.